Hola. Sí. Buenas tardes, bienvenidos al espacio.
So good afternoon, welcome to Fundación Telefónica space. And this is a very important day for us because, as many of you know already, the Telos magazine, which was born in 1985, has been a priority project for the digital cultural area of the foundation, devoting itself to spreading knowledge and disseminating knowledge. But this magazine that has always been aware of innovation and technology advances wants to also focus on Latin America, on social sciences and culture in a digital society. But Telos doesn't want to stop there, doesn't want to just be a magazine. We have been for over a year creating a whole ecosystem around the Telos magazine, where we have different projects that support ideas and messages that are published in our magazine. And today especially we have a project that we did with a lot of enthusiasm, which is the Telos Forum, where we have meetings with national and international experts, talented ones, knowledgeable ones that are protagonists of the change that we are living these days. Their vision, their capacity, their ability to have insight is going to help us frame our trip, our voyage, so that we can reflect upon the path to follow and trace the most relevant and appropriate mechanisms to achieve a more balanced and better world. This optimistic perspective of technology, this focusing science around the human being, from which we analyze advances, does not avoid us to have to analyze risks, so that we can wonder why and from which point are we analyzing digitalization. Opportunities are great, but it is very demanding to analyze the different imbalances that can be produced, especially because our objective as Fundación Telefónica is nobody is left behind or disconnected from these opportunities. Nobody will be distant from the enormous amount of knowledge that is at the service of society in a more and more networked society. Here in Telos, we want to give voice to experts such as the ones we have here today. I want to give a warm welcome and thanks for having come here to the participants of the Inclusive Cities, Sustainable Cities Telos Forum, Saskia Sassen, who is the Princess of Asturias Award for Social Sciences 2013, and Carlo Ratti, who is an architect and engineer and inventor and an activist from Italy. They are with us, which is a great privilege, and they are going to be here accompanied by Juan Zafra, who is the director of the Telos magazine and the Fundación Telefónica magazine. So I hope that you will really profit from this session. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Carmen. Bueno, yo brevísimo.
Well, thank you very much. I would like to be brief, but I have to start by saying that I'm really thankful to Carmen and all the whole team of Fundación Telefónica for this Telos Forum. I think that everybody that is part of a Telos community can be really proud of this first Telos Forum, where for a couple of weeks we will pick up all the analysis, the ideas, reflections of important thinkers of our time, and it follows the line of the topics that have already been tackled during this new era of Telos, the one that we started 2 years ago with transforming from a disruptive point of view the magazine, both online and in paper format. We publish on paper 3 times a year, but we do it online 2 times a week. And Telos aims at explaining the time that we are living. It is the time of singularity, the time of technology and scientific progress in an accelerated and convergent way, with the goal of knowing, sharing experiences and knowledge, and drawing a future that is desirable. We're sure of that. It's far away from dystopias. We will have 4 days to discuss things that belong to digital humans. We start by speaking about inclusive and sustainable cities, because it's true that what we do not build is impossible to what do not dream is impossible to be built. And from Telos and Fundación Telefónica, we're doing so, but we still have to analyze what are the risks in order to avoid them. We will do this, as I've already said, with Saskia Ratti and Saskia Sassen and Marcus Ratti. It's a great pleasure to have you here. They will both speak, and after that we'll have a roundtable. Tomorrow we will speak about the digital human. It was our first number. We have Anders Sambers here. It will be tomorrow. Juan Luis Arzuaga and Marta Garcia Ayer that will moderate them. Third meeting will be our first protagonist of the new era, under case Cyborg. That will be with a Rob Rod, that is a creator and art curator, that will talk to Chema Valenzuela. And next week we will have Jared Diamond, that is one of the most important thinkers of our time, that has just published a book about the crisis of nations, and highlighting that the word crisis means opportunity to build a future. So I'm going to say a few words about Saskia Sassen. I don't know where to start, so I will read the record of the Prince of Asturias award that was awarded to her in 2013 for her contribution to urban sociology and analysis of the social, economic and political dimensions of globalization. She is a global human, not only for how much she travels, she knows, and what she has lived. She was born in Lehaj, but she grew up in Argentina. Now she lives between Argentina, France, the UK, US. Apart from that, she speaks Russian, German, and Japanese a little bit. Well, Wikipedia is not always right. Okay. And she has amazing books. I'll just mention a couple of them. The most recent one is Expulsiones, Brutality and Complexity in Global Economy, but she wrote Globalization and its Disappointments, New Geopolitics. There's a number that is devoted to geographic battles, losing control. We had Jaron Lanier, who has a great book that is about who controls the future, and Saskia has Losing Control. I wish we do not lose it. And she has another book that is the role model for this first discussion, that is Global City. And this is the concept that she has developed. The cities are a network by themselves, but as humanity and humankind progresses, these megalopolis are setting a world network that has its chances and its disadvantages, of course. She has a floor, and please pay attention to her. Thank you.
20 minutos, ¿no? Bueno, es un gran placer.
Well, it is a great pleasure to be here with you. I came here many times to different Telefónica Foundation events, and I very much cherish the projects that they are launching. I have a very particular way to speak or to present, very different to your way about how I work in this world of certain types of technologies. And therefore, so as to start, one of my projects was one of my earliest projects when the digitalization was launched, was to understand whether poor districts in New York could benefit from the modality of the emerging technology at that time. And I carried out a project which was a rather boring project, I would say, so as to understand what are the needs in poor districts, because New York has a lot of people, poor people. It's a city filled with poor people, and I wanted to speak of this on the record, so because I think there is a need to understand what are the things that poor districts or poor families or poor students need, so that how can we enable them and facilitate them to improve their lives. Because the commercial aspect has been prevailing in most aspects, except for some scientific fields where this did not happen. But the technological topic normally is under the shape of, well, how can we sell, to whom can we sell, etc. And I understand that our project has this goal as well. Second point I wanted to present is the work that I'm carrying out now, where technological issues enter through a different type of angle, in the sense that I tackle an analysis of high finances, the financial system, but the high financial system, the high spheres, in the sense that they've done tremendous innovations with these types of technology. This is true. I mean, it's a part of the process in these sectors. And therefore, I am very committed, and I've been threatened, I have to say, by some people who did not like what I was doing, so as to understand how algorithm mathematics, which is a modality of what has to do with high technology, is a very special modality, so as to understand how this algorithm mathematics has altered in a really important or significant way the financial system. There are currently two financial systems, the traditional banking system and then something that works basically with algorithms, high finance in English. And therefore, I have worked with the rapporteur for housing. I don't know if you know who Leila Farhani is. We have been working on a project including different parts of the world, where we have seen how the use of algorithm mathematics by certain financial entities has had consequences that were rather negative in many cases. 2 years of work, a wonderful movie or film that has been seen many parts by many people, that has opened the eyes of some types of sectors in around 20 countries throughout the world. Not all the countries, of course, but this has been a project that was really fulfilling for me. The content is really negative, a negative one. And I would like to describe very briefly what is the content about, by way of a very simple example. Through algorithm mathematics, which is a modality, as I said before, a very special and complex modality of mathematics, through algorithm mathematics, the T, maybe my old trousers, etc., can be transformed into something that could be called in English an asset. An asset. Activo in Spanish, right? And this is an asset algorithm mathematics is a kind of intelligence that is really, really admirable, surprisingly good. So in the world of high finances, this algorithm mathematics or capacity has led, well, one of the elements to which this has led to, one of the elements that really interests me is how even the poorest house can be transformed into an asset, in an asset-backed security. In Spanish, that would be like something like a, well, an asset, yeah. And by way of example, I could say, okay, I can walk. Okay, that's good, I can walk. Maybe anybody has heard about Schwarzman, and a man called Schwarzman. He bought big poor housing buildings in 17 different countries. He's a financial man who has known how to use this brilliant way of knowledge, which is high finances, this algorithm mathematics at a very high level. And one of the things he bought in 17 countries were these buildings, big buildings, conceived for poor people. And therefore, well, he tried in Barcelona. I don't know if you know about this, because that was a scandal some months ago in Barcelona. He tried to buy a series of buildings in Barcelona, and there was a kind of contestation, and well, he didn't, in the end he went away. Maybe you heard about it, but these are things that are altering the lives of a lot of people that are living in different districts. And in any case, he bought this series of big buildings in 17 different countries, and then he said, okay, he told the people, okay, we are going to revamp your house. You must leave for some months. We're talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of big buildings in 17 different countries, as I said. This is a story that started like 3 or 4 years ago. So he refurbished all the houses. Then the people came back. Then the price went up to almost double the price. Okay, so again, buildings with very modest and poor houses. So a lot of those people did not or could not continue living there. This is one part, but there is another part. And we need to understand the second part as well. And we need to know how to handle this. The value of the building is not the fact that it's composed by many houses where people pay their rent. Yeah, well, that counts as well, but it's a very small part. In the high financial sector, and I'm sure that many of you work there, is the look for assets. So that's something that is not a derivative. Derivatives are for people like me, the modest ones, the people that, well, work their life through. But this is an emergent reality that we need to understand, we need to acknowledge, and in my opinion, we need to contest that, to fight for that. Therefore, as I was saying, a modest house, especially if it's a big building with a lot of houses, of course, this can work, but this can also become an asset. We don't see it, but it is like a kind of land filled with asset-backed securities. The high financial sector, and I'm sure that you know this, the high financial sector does not want derivatives, because those derivatives are for modest professors or teachers or, you know, just normal people. How do you get an asset? Buildings, perfect. We see the building, but the reality behind that building is that the building is working as an asset. You can buy and sell, buy and sell, and buy and sell. So you have the building, and then there is a kind of operational field what we cannot see with our eyes, where everything is transformed into an asset. And this could be anything. Of course, I'm exaggerating when I say it could be anything, but it could be practically anything. And this is what we're working on. Some of us are working on this. I mention this because it is highly troublesome topic. It has generated a lot of battles, one of them in Barcelona, as I mentioned. And this story started like 2 or 3 years ago. Now more and more people are aware about this. They have gone to Africa and some of African countries. They are working like that. I mean, and this can lead to many problems because in the end, they will oust more and more people with modest income out of their homes. It starts with an invitation and then it ends up with expelling those people, ousting those people from their house. But the mentality that they are using is absolutely brilliant. And this is the work of physicists. Nothing to do with traditional banking, nothing to do with traditional accountancy, nothing. It's a brand new world. Should I stop talking? Do I have some time left? Okay, thank you. And therefore, this is something that is happening. In many places, people are aware of this, and I'm sure that in Madrid there's been something like this. These people come, these actors, very significant actors, and they say, just out of this place, I'm going to revamp your house, and then people come back, and well, yeah, the house is much prettier and much nicer, but of course, they cannot pay for them. So the main goal is to generate those asset-backed securities, because normal assets would not be interesting anymore. And now there are mobilizations in many countries. Some victories have occurred in Berlin, for example. Berlin, where there was a whole debate on housing. There are debates on housing in many countries. You know that. You know that it is a very hot topic. I never thought that I would be involved in that. But the thing is, I repeat, high finances need assets. How do you build assets? How do you create them? So many things have been financed now that this is the modality that is on now, how to capture materialities. And the image is the house becomes this asset field, kind of. How do you say assets? Activo. Can you say activo? Activo. So assets. Well, I would like the foundation, the Telefónica Foundation, to study this topic a little bit, because there are many people now that are aware of that, well, it is a rather new, modern topic, but I think there are many people aware of this, and there could be some opposition to this, etc., etc. But then the truth is, it's this way of thinking that I've just described. We see the rise of absolutely extractive logics. High finances today work with or as an extractive logic. The high finance sector in the States, in New York precisely, knows perfectly well how to extract advantages, enormous advantages, positive advantages, huge advantages, through something that very acknowledged scientists do, algorithm mathematics. And I feel sad because of this, because algorithm mathematics is a great source of foreknowledge, and the physicians that do this are really good people, but this has become also a utility function for a project that I do not admire. In fact, I find it deeply troublesome. And if you see the figures, the numbers of how many people come ousted from their homes, it's dramatic, really. And it also happened in Barcelona, as I said. But in Barcelona, there was some struggle, there were some fights, and this happened like 3 or 4 months ago in one of the Barcelona districts. And as I said, people are more informed now, and they know, and they fought against this, and they won. I have to say they won, because these people are very, very clever. They say, okay, I refuse. I'm not going to accept this. So that was a very interesting case, and one of the first victories against this type of modality. Well, I spoke in very shorthand, in a nutshell, let's say, of something that is really complex, involving many countries, and I just hope that if there are parts of my presentation that are not clear, I would be very happy to answer your questions at the end of the session. So I'm going to leave the floor for the other persons who wants to talk.
Gracias, Saskia.
Thank you, Saskia. Well, she's warned us about, well, I would say that it's a dehumanization of the algorithms. Well, for the roundtable, we let you come to the most optimistic side of technology. Well, the algorithm has its humanistic characteristics, and humans have it that because we program, we set that algorithm. So behind every algorithm, every machine, there's a human being. We had Cassie O'Neill, who has written the book of mathematic destruction weapons. She was speaking about the risks that entails the fact of letting machines take care of finance, education, etc. Well, just a few words to introduce Carlo Ratti. We were writing in English, and as soon as he got in here, he said "Hola, buenas tardes" in Spanish. So it's like, well, he's a global being too. He builds cities, he makes them more human. He is considered one of the 50 most important designers in the world. He teaches, he shares knowledge, and he is based at the MIT, and he deals with the interaction between humans, technology, and cities. And I would say that he's part of our Telos community because he's part of the digital humans. And this is what we're going to speak about in our next publication. He combines engineering, technology, data analysis. His projects are based on data, sociology, and arts. He's part of the Council for the Future of the World, and he deals with cities and urbanism of the World Economic Forum, and he's an advisor for the European Commission. We'll speak with you later to see how we can deal with all this. Thank you, Carlo.
Bueno. Tengo que decir una cosa. Cuando me invitaron.
Okay, so I have to say something. When they invited me, they said that I had to speak in Spanish. So I've watched YouTube videos in Spanish. So as this afternoon they said that I could speak in English. Maybe can we see the slides, please? I'm going to speak English if you don't mind, but after that we'll try to speak in Spanish with the great Saskia, or in Spanglish, okay? But now I'm going to speak in English.
Thanks all for inviting me. It's it's a pleasure to be back here in your beautiful city. I love Madrid. I spent a lot of time here. And what I want to say is tell you about we heard about how mathematics and data can be used also to destroy a city or to create trouble in a city. What I want to share with you tonight is actually how we can also use data, mathematics, and so on in order to make a city better. But that requires to do that in a very open way and to include citizens in the process. So, Tonight, I don't know if you noticed, we heard the word future quite a few times. Both about in a presentation by Telefónica, by Carmen, and so on. So I want to start with the future and show how the future looked like in the past. So I'm going to show you a few visions that were actually date back from the late 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, by a bunch of French artists. And they tried to imagine future in the year 2000. And they got some things right. For instance, they saw mechanization in agriculture coming. They saw it well. They even saw Roomba before it got in our homes, But they also got a lot of things wrong. They thought that the police would move like this. Now, I was stopped by the very sophisticated police here in Madrid, but they still don't use this. And also that, we would move in the oceans like this. And that hasn't happened. And the reason for that is that, we cannot predict the future. That was actually famously said by many people, including Karl Popper. Karl Popper said the future is open, it's not predetermined. No one can predict it except by chance. We all contribute to determining it by what we do. We're all equally responsible for its success. And by the way, another thing, I didn't quote it here, but another thing that Popper said is actually that optimism is a duty. And is a duty precisely because the future, which is where we need to be optimist or pessimist about, is upon us. So also thinking about responding to what Saskia was saying, we'll probably talking about in the discussion, even if there's many issues in cities today, we can hopefully solve some of them and look at what are the, what is behind them, and understanding the issues is the first step for so we then, what can we do about this? As Popper says, we need to act on the present in order to transform it. And that's what we are passionate about. We're passionate about doing it in cities. Cities are undergoing a very interesting phenomenon because we know a lot about cities we didn't know before. The data dimension wasn't there in this way just 5 or 10 years ago. But today we can understand the city in an amazing way that we couldn't. Again, just as recently as at the turn of the millennium. And that's what we do. We do it both from MIT, a Sensible City Lab in Boston and Singapore. We do it with our design office. I'm not going to talk to you about our design work tonight, but if you're interested, you find it online. You find some of the projects. We've done some projects we're very proud of also here in Spain. And also with some of the startups that came from us. So tonight I'm going to talk about research and data and mapping the city. That's, by the way, that's the title of the latest book we're doing. It's going to come out by Yale University Press next year. And we're doing with Antoine Picon, which is the Atlas of the Sensible City. And so how data can help us understand the city in a different way. Because if you look at maps in the past, maps look like this. That's a beautiful map. It's a Nolli's, Giambattista Nolli's map of Rome. It dates back to 1747. It's one of the maps that define modern cartography. It's a beautiful map of buildings, but also is a map that there looked at public space and private space. Private space is black, public space is white. And you see, by the way, the old public spaces, also courtyards in Rome, are white. So it highlights this kind of beautiful structure of connected public spaces, both outside of private buildings, also inside with the courtyards. But if this has been the way to represent the city for a long time, today that is changing. And it's changing a little bit in a way that following kind of a metaphor, a dream that has inspired many people. Borges in South America. But also, this is from Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll, this idea of having a map of a place, a mile to the mile. So it's almost like, the idea, and then came the grandest idea of all. We actually made a map of the country on the scale of a mile to the mile. Have you used it much? I inquired. It has never been spread out yet, said Manhur. The farmers objected. They said it would cover the whole country and shut out the sunlight. So now we use the country itself as its own map, and I assure you, it does nearly as well. And what I'm saying here is actually this idea of the map that becomes increasingly detailed up to the time when we know everything about the physical space, and we get what today people call a digital twin. It's really a twin of the physical space. So it's this whole dream that the map becomes a one-to-one copy. Everything which is in physical space is mapped into digital space. It becomes really a total twin. A total twin that we can analyze, and we can use mathematics in order, hopefully, not only to extract value, as we heard before, but hopefully to turn it into something better. Now, I want to share with you, for instance, one of the first maps we did. I decided to show this because we are here hosted by Fundación Telefónica. And this is a very old project. It's a project from 2006. In 2006, the Biennale, the Venice Biennale, a large exhibition about art and architecture and cities, was curated by Ricky Burdett. And Ricky's theme was the city, the meta city, the city with data. And then we had a pavilion. Saskia, by the way, was there at the opening with us. In a pavilion where we did an experiment that at the time had never been done. We decided to take a big city, because this was in Italy. We took the city of Rome and collect as much real-time data as possible and show it at the Biennale. And so we got data from the cell phone network, from Telecom Italia, from the taxi network, and so on. We sent all of that to servers we set up at MIT. We were using artificial intelligence to analyze the data, to visualize it, and then we would send the results back in real time at the Venice Biennale. And by the way, when you all today open Google and you see in real time you've got traffic problem on the road, well, some of those algorithms use some of the ones we developed over 10 years ago here based on the at the Venice Biennale in this project. If you're interested, there's a lot of papers. I'm sharing some of the papers. If any of you, I saw there's a lot of young people and seen some students before. If you're interested in the papers, you find them on our website. They're all open access, so you can look at the mathematics yourself. Now, I'll show you something interesting. That summer, there was a final, the soccer world final, Italy and France playing. Italy won the soccer World Cup. Look at what happened with the cell phone network in Rome during the final. That's before the match. People moving in Rome here and there, the Colosseum, the river. In a moment, the match begins, silence. Nobody talks anymore. France scores, Italy scores. Half-time, people make a quick call and go to the bathroom. End of normal time, first overtime, second overtime. Some of you might remember the headbutt by Zidane. And finally, Italy wins. Hey, big applause. And then the night everybody went to celebrate here in the center. The following day again, people went to celebrate in the center. You see it here. And then by the end of the day, everybody moved to a place called Circo Massimo, where since Roman times, people go and celebrate. And you see a peak happening here. That's a big party. Day 2 after winning the soccer World Cup. So the idea that data can show a city in a way we couldn't before. I'll show you another project. It's from this paper we did in the UK. And we were working with British Telecom, but also collaborating with the Prime Minister's office, who was interested in understanding communities and also how to redraw constituencies. And so what we did, we asked a mathematical question. I will not get into the detail, and try to use connectivity in the country. When we did this was more recently. It was a few years later than what I showed you before. When we did it, was the largest ever made social network or telecommunication network, non-internet telecommunication network. And we used it in order to understand communities and regions. And so if you look at this, we found a geography which is different than the geography we know. And it's a geography which is based on how people naturally connect with each other. And I'll show you a little video about it. Oops. Sorry, the music. Show you the music. So every time we got a phone call, we build a connection between places. And if we aggregate all of this at the scale of the country, we build a network, a human network. And then we use it mathematically as a way to better understand communities. And then here you see the way this works. And the geography that comes out is very interesting. It's a new geography. Naturally, it doesn't have any link with the boundaries. It's really just based on how people connect. And if you look at that, Wales is very different. Scotland is very similar to what we know, but Wales is very different. The centre of Wales is actually more connected to the centre of England, and the rest is actually split into two parts. So it's kind of a new geography which is not based on politics, on history. It's really based on the natural way we all connect with each other. And actually that led us also to study other things. It's another network, telecommunication network, where we looked at a very important thing that actually was discovered by Geoffrey West. As you might see here, Geoffrey is one of the co-authors of this paper. And Geoffrey discovered that actually cities, if you take a city and you double the size, some parameters grow more than double. It's what is called superlinear scaling. Some other things actually grow less than double. It's called sublinear scaling. And that is actually mathematically very interesting. It's something that we see also in animals, in nature, and so it can be explained in different ways. And so here we looked at how human interaction scales in different cities. So this is actually a very large telecommunication network in Portugal. We looked at the communication network, the social network, all across the country. And if you look on average in Lisbon, you got a network around yourself like this. While on average in a small city, Lisha, I think is the smallest city in Portugal, you get a network like this. Now, the interesting thing is that even in a big city, we tend to create a network with high clustering. So we create a small village where people all know each other. All of our friends know each other. So somehow we create a village around ourselves in a similar way, but the size of the village is a bit bigger than what it is in a small city. And actually, the scaling exponent is very similar to the scaling exponent that we find in other things. For instance, in the number of patents. So it's very interesting. We interact with more people. The number grows in the same way. Is actually the creativity that can be measured from, say, patents or ideas developed in cities. So again, the idea that basically we can analyze the network and use it in order to better understand society. Or we can look at a city like this. We couldn't a few years ago. That's a map of Lisbon, again, mapped using billions of data points collected from thousands of taxis in the city. The visualization is by Pedro Cruz, who was in our lab at MIT. Pedro is now teaching at Northeastern in Boston, and this was at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And if you look at this, you can take all this data and analyze it. Again, this is an example of how you can use mathematics potentially for improving the city. So that's the same data in New York. Every taxi here, dot is a pickup or a drop-off. A yellow dot is a pickup, a blue dot is a drop-off. You zoom out, you see Manhattan and all of the boroughs. Before we saw JFK, the little point. And then the first question we asked was, how many trips could be shared? Now, if you look at those 2 points in Manhattan, they're connected by hundreds of thousands of trips in the course of the year. So how many of those trips could be shared? And if you want to phrase it mathematically, you need to say something like, imagine you want to take everybody to destination when they need to be there. What is the minimum number of vehicles that you need in order to do that with a certain delay, a certain delta delay? So we looked at network science to do it. When you got big data, sometimes we say you need big math or new math in order to analyze it. So we look at network science to answer that question. You see here these kind of shareability networks we developed. And what we discovered is actually in New York, you could take everybody to destination when they need to be there, give or take a small delta of 2 or 3 minutes, but with 40% less taxis than what you have today. Now, an interesting thing is that the results were published before Uber launched Uber Pool. There was a nice debate on the New York Times and online about the results, and actually Uber reached out to us. We started the first collaboration with Uber, and as you might know, Uber Pool today does exactly this, allows two people going more or less in the same direction to share mobility, which means that instead of having 2 cars on the road, you got 1, which means less congestion, less pollution, and less energy consumption in our cities. Uber Pool at the beginning, nobody would know if it would take off, but actually it has been quite big in some cities. I believe in San Francisco, it reached 50% of all trips every day actually happening by sharing your ride with a stranger. I will tell you next year when we meet about the follow-up project our students are passionate about, which is combining Uber Pool and Tinder or Grindr, but that's a different conversation. If you're interested, again, you can see the papers online. I'll show you a more recent paper, again, on the same data, which is asking mathematically a different question. Imagine tomorrow a future of self-driving cars. What is the minimum number of cars you need to keep Manhattan on the move? That's a little video. the right you see today to the left you see how it could be tomorrow. And so tomorrow, if we had a more efficient dispatching system, we could again make the city much more sustainable, theoretically running it with 50% of the vehicles we have today. Again, if you're interested in the mathematics, we use this also with shareability networks, a similar approach to the previous one, and it was in Nature, and if you're interested, the paper is from a year ago, it's available on the site. Now, other things. Now, I'll show you now at the moment, so far you saw data about people connecting or cars moving, but the car itself not only moves in sense back position, but actually the car itself is becoming like a big sensor. An average car today collects data about around 2,000 to 3,000 parameters every second. So you can start using it to get information about the city. For instance, we started working on cars and how they help us monitor the infrastructure of a country. And you might have seen over a year and a half ago, there was a collapse of a bridge in Italy, but bridge collapse has been quite common. There's a famous collapse of a bridge called the Tacoma Bridge that happened in the United States a few decades ago. Or another story is this bridge, which is called Longfellow Bridge. To the left, you see MIT. That's the beginning of the MIT campus. To the right is downtown Boston. And then Longfellow Bridge was fine until when somebody went to monitor it, and they realized it has very serious structural flaws. So they had to stop it, to disconnect the two sides of the city. It was rebuilt, basically, at the cost of a few $100 million. And, the city, as I said, with a big disruption and cost for the community. And the reason for that is that we didn't monitor it regularly as we should have done. And the reason is that when you monitor a bridge, here you see the Golden Gate, it can be quite expensive. You can put sensors like that, or you can send people. What you measure is vibrations. But, the cost of monitoring a bridge can be up to $500,000 per year. So you cannot do it on all the bridges in a country. But, as I was telling you before today, every car has a system to monitor vibrations. And every phone actually has an accelerometer that measures accelerometer measures acceleration in different directions. So what we said, what if we take this information and try to use it in order to monitor, to see if we can use it to monitor the structural health of infrastructure. So we took a car, we collected data from the car, from 3 different smartphones, from a professional accelerometer, as you see there, and we started monitoring the Golden Gate. Why the Golden Gate? Because it's a bridge where we know everything about it. So we got perfect ground truth about it. We know very well how it behaves. So we started going back and forth across the Golden Gate over 100 times. That's why you want to have a lot of graduate research students involved in the team. After 100 times, the San Francisco police got a bit suspicious, so they pulled us over and, asking us questions. But anyway, we managed to collect the data. You see here the raw data. It turns out that actually using this data, you can determine the main frequencies of vibration of the bridge. So now what we are doing, this was done a couple of years ago. So what we are doing now is working with Uber in the United States and working with Allianz insurance company in a big European country in order to see if we can monitor in one go all the infrastructure of a country. It becomes quite interesting. It's not perfect, but you get very easily the frequencies, which means it's a bit like when you go to hospital. When you get there, they measure your temperature and your blood pressure, and then if there's a problem, you can do additional testing. So in a similar way, we can almost for free get all this data from the whole country and then use it in order to see what we might want to do and collect additional data to see what is going on. Now, I was telling you that basically the car collects data from 2,000 to 3,000 variables every second. But if you add 2 additional sensors, like the 2-liter here, like this, they do a 3-dimensional scan of the city like this. You feed it into an artificial intelligence system, and the car drives itself. And the interesting thing here is that the car that drives itself means that it doesn't need to be parked. It can keep on moving, keep on being on the system. Today, a car is used on average 5% of the time. If it's a driving car, and so 95% of the time it is parked, a self-driving car can keep on being on the system. You can use it, then it can be used by somebody else in your family or anybody else in the city. So somehow we can create a new mobility system because of having a piece of infrastructure which is used much better than today. And so that's something we're working on a lot in Singapore. We just had a paper that came out to estimate that we could actually free 70% of parking spaces in Singapore if we were to move, as the government wants, into a full self-driving car system. And I wanted to finish with a couple of other things. In the future, when everything might be self-driving, other things might change. For instance, this. That's a well-known traffic light. And traffic lights appear on our roads when cars appear on our roads. But if you've got an intelligent system where every car knows where it is and where all the other cars are, you don't need to stop anymore. You can keep on going, just avoiding collisions, like this. Don't try it yet? I showed it in Naples, and it told me, what is new here? Now, I can make such politically incorrect jokes because I'm Italian, but I need to tell you the former Italian minister once said that in Milan traffic lights are instructions, in Rome there are suggestions, in Naples there are Christmas decorations. Well, again, if you're interested in, you can find a lot of this in the papers on our website. Very briefly, a couple of final things. We can also look at nature in cities. And we've been mapping nature in cities all over the world. Again, you can get data from Google. That's data that Google collects from Street View. You find it in most cities around the world. And you can analyze it with artificial intelligence and map all the trees in a city. It becomes very interesting. When we launch a project now, thousands of people started writing to us because they compare the neighborhoods with another city, with another part of the city. And then they go to their mayor and say, well, I want more trees, more green. So somehow that knowledge becomes a very good thing to start, citizen engagement, to have citizens respond to that information. Another project we are doing, we're looking at the city from health. So what you see here is a famous map, is a map of John Snow's map of London, which actually was used in order to determine the modality of transmission of cholera. So you see here what he did was he mapped all the cases of cholera in all the wells and realized that actually water played a big role in transmitting the disease. And one of the things we're doing something similar, mapping sewage, looking at viruses and bacteria in sewage. And the reason is that in our body, for every living cell, we got 9 or 10 viruses or bacteria living with us. It's called the human microbiome. And the human microbiome was just discovered in recent years. And it's very related, it looks like, with our health. And so today we cannot yet monitor the microbiome for each of us individually, but we can do it at an aggregator level. And sewage is an amazing aggregator. So we actually started going into sewage and collecting this information. So here you see, this is actually a view from inside the sewage system. Here you can see some of the people from our team. In the beginning, we were doing all of this manually. Then we thought it was not great fun, so we went to our colleagues at Computer Science, Artificial Intelligence, to design a little robot to go down. You'll see it in a moment. There's a team setting up in Cambridge. You see the robot going down now. Samples automatically. It actually has a bunch of sensors and analytics on the robot itself. And then some of the samples are taken to the lab for metagenomics and metabolomics as well. And incredible what you find in it. You can actually see the influenza virus. Before people have influenza, you find it in the sewage. So it becomes like an early warning system for diseases. And as we like also to look at all these kind of the guts of the city, I would say, to finish, I want to share with you also how we like to look at waste. If you look at this computer, you know everything about it, but when you throw it away, you know very little. So we developed a little tag, which is like a miniature cell phone to track waste and see where it goes. We had to design it. We couldn't find it off the shelf. We did the first deployment in Seattle. 500 people came with 3,000 pieces of trash. We put a little tag on all of them. Anything from electronics to banana peel. And after tagging all of them, we started following them. Like here you see 3,000 objects, pieces of trash, the day they were released in Seattle. After a couple of days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. But then a big surprise, how far stuff started to travel. Sometimes in crazy, unexpected way. Look at the trace that went all the way to Chicago, changed its mind, and went back to California. And still moving after 1 month or 2 months. So we discovered many things from the project. First, we could actually save a lot of energy by optimizing this. Think about optimizing those traces could be a gold mine for society, because sometimes we move things. By the way, Farewell Symphony we thought was the right music, but no, we can optimize this and save a lot of energy. Second thing, very important as well, if you share the data with people, we're sharing this information with the volunteers, that will start behavioral change. Actually, we then went back and gave questionnaires to people, and it looks like, the knowledge, big data, the knowledge of the consequences we have on the city, on the environment, can actually change our behavior in a very important way. Just a little anecdote. The person came to us and said, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day and then throw them away and forget about them. And now, after the project, I know they go to a landfill next to home. They will stay there forever. So stop drinking water in plastic bottles. So the data can actually change behavior. The third thing is that we discovered a lot of places, a lot of waste that was going outside the boundaries of the US. And so over the past couple of years, we've been doing an experiment, the largest ever tracking of e-waste on a global scale, where we found places such as this one in the middle of the jungle in Asia. You can go on the website, see all the traces. Some of them are legal, some are not. They're all just e-waste shipped all over the world. If you're interested, there's also a special by PBS, which is the national television channel in the United States that follow this. And so the idea that big data can tell us about the loopholes on the global system and help us fix it. And the final thing is perhaps the unexpected one. The unexpected one is something that happened when a burglar came to our offices at MIT. And this poor guy stole a lot of things, including tags and computers that tell you where they go. And this is what happened. Thank you.
Gracias. Muchas gracias, Carlo.
Impresionante.
Sí. Bueno, hemos asistido a una frase que decía Carlo de cómo el dato.
Okay, I will retain his sentence of data can do good, can do evil as well, like the algorithms. Let's take a seat.
Okay. Whatever.
Tenemos un rato para conversar en Spanglish, dijimos, ¿no?
So we have a little while to converse, to speak in Spanglish. As I said, I'm going to try to speak Spanish. I was working my Spanish with YouTube for 2 weeks. I've never spoken publicly in Spanish. Let's see if I can do it. So they are two big friends, great friends. And we've been honored by listening to 2 different visions on how technology impacts us. Well, this is impressive. I have never seen such a big piece of work from yours. I've seen little things here and there, because normally we only see each other to have lunch together, but not for serious matters. No, I'm impressed, really. For how long have you worked on all this? Well, today I presented together projects of different years, like the 2006 Venice Biennale, for example, because I was asked to speak about the mathematical part and data part that can be dangerous, etc. And I deemed interesting to see how the city is aware of things and how the city reacts, and how we should know it has to transform it and redesign it, maybe. And this is very interesting. And also scientific articles in Nature and other journals are very interesting for me as well. In these journals, really you can read a lot of things, design projects, for example, because they always start by doing the maths. But they start by asking, for example, how could mobility in New York be different? For example, so this question of how this or that could be different, that is the first question, and it's an interesting one. So I'm going to launch a question to both of you. How do we make the global city a more human one? Are you asking him or are you asking me? Both of you. I'm asking both of you. Because to you, because I know that you're working on this, Carlo. Yes, I think that it is always interesting to think that 10,000 years ago there were no cities, or 15,000 years ago there were no cities. Foundation Telefónica 15,000 years ago, we were not there. No, it was there. I mean, Foundation Telefónica was here 15,000 years ago. Well, no. But Romans, the old ancient Romans, had cities. In China, there were cities. No, I'm meaning 15,000 years ago. No, okay, not that far. But then all that appeared, the polis, and then everything re-emerged. We have to remember that they existed, these cities, but it's a different reality. But you're speaking about Romans, yeah, but we were saying that there is a moment like 10,000 years ago when mankind invented cities due to a very simple reason. Together, there are very good advantages or good things that can be drawn from being together, ideas that can be transmitted from one another to one another, and much better, in a much better way than if we act individually. And this is why cities are so important today. According to Shakespeare, well, he says, what is the city but the people? So this is something like what we're doing here today. We're discussing about some topics, and we're together doing it. And this is the main thing of cities, and the big danger today is that many cities, this connection, the community, the togetherness, let's say, can be broken with these ghettos or parts that do not interact with each other, parts that are poor parts that are rich people's parts, etc. Why has this happened? I would like you to explain this, Saskia, because you analyze this very well. Well, we're living in a very particular way, in a very particular moment, and I tried to convey this in my presentation. There are some actors having certain capacities, like, for example, high finances, and they can transform a whole series of conditions into something that works to their advantage, but not to other people's advantage. And this is what I try to mean. But cities have a continuous capacity to reinvent themselves, to contest good things and bad things. But what marks cities is that they are a very complex system, but a very perfect one, normally. But normally you contribute all positive things. It is incredible. And they are small things. We can understand most of them. Well, maybe we cannot do them, but we can understand them. We can see the advantages of that. We can say, I like this, I like that. And this is like, oh my God, I'm on holiday here. Such a positive thing. It's so impressive. Well, design as design in the Anglo-Saxon world, designing is the project. The project is like transforming something, and in it you have this the kind of optimism as a duty. It is like seeing the possibility on how to transform things, and if we want to transform things, let's do it in a better way. Let's transform it for the better. But it is also important to see the risks. But my question, I always say, all innovations are like a kind of curve, up, 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 good, 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 fantastic. But then there is a moment where something ambiguous or dubious or negative enters, and then the curve starts changing. And my question would go in the sense that, do you find in all these innovations that you described, those fabulous innovations really, do you find this curve effect or curve type effect? So everything goes very, very well, fantastically, but then it reaches the top and then it starts going down. Like, for example, in high finances, this is something brilliant, like with algorithm mathematics, etc. But then there is this declining phase, because we human beings are not perfect, are we? And this technological perfection is captured up to which point, and up to which extent the conditions that we humans represent, affect this or influence this curve? Well, this is a very good question. I was thinking about the cars. Cars, for example, just started, and then 50 years after their appearance, all the cities were using cars or were having cars, and then we have now people dying out of consequences of cars. Or you can think about Facebook and social networks, which was a very good thing at the beginning, but then, or at the beginning in the well, how do you call that? Paul? Well? Yeah, well. When you're talking to each other, and then you're writing to each other, and then in the 20th century you are using the telephone, and you have communities of friends that can get an appointment on the phone, etc. And we're doing the same things right now, but at the beginning everybody was happy with social networks, the same as with the telephone in the 19th century and 20th century, etc. And now with Facebook we have the fake news, and we have dubious uses of those social networks and those technologies. So this could be like the curve going down. I mean, you are right. There are many things. It is with technology, it is always in the beginning, we tend to be very optimistic, and we tend to use technology so as to improve cities and improve societies, but then or civilizations, but then there are different forces that use technology in a negative way, and then these technologies become maybe neutral or even negative. Some weeks ago I was working on an article on fintech, technology applied to finances, and very precisely projects, so applied to real estate. And I was talking to some economists on the low impact that it is having in the lowering the prices. So the market is moving a lot because there is an access without intermediaries. There is a direct access of citizens to these technologies. This is very important. I mean, the intermediaries, the middlemen, never lose, or practically never. And if you think about our current technologies in our big cities, there is like an intermediate sector, a middleman sector, which are financial systems, but all the expertise that you need. Think about big companies that operate on a worldwide level. They have a whole set of experts on countries, on conditions, on products, whatever. And this sector that can give you the necessary information. For example, if you're an inventor that want to visit Mongolia to extract some metal, some gold or whatever, these technologies can give you the access. So there are thousands and thousands of companies that are intermediary, that never lose or practically never lose, because they sell their services and their knowledge. And this is a sector that is, well, I admire it because there is a lot of knowledge and expertise, but it is very troublesome as well because it generates in companies the notion that we don't need to understand that because those experts will deal with that and they will, choose what is better for me. And this is why in a big city such as New York or London, that is the prevailing sector. I mean, it's not the big, what was the name? Not the big foundations, but the big businesses. No, it's those intermediary sectors or that intermediary sector, which in big cities is enormous, and they never lose. But the risks are there. The risks are for those using those services, and then they go to different countries to experiment or to discover things. So there is a kind of asymmetry in all this, and high finances follow this path. I mean, follow this trend. It is difficult for them to lose. If there is a general crisis, then yes, they lose. But this is remarkable, I would say. And what I very much like in your job, Carlo, is that you take the little things that are everywhere. So thousands and thousands of little things that are everywhere, scattered here and there, they have an impact, a very close impact, a very near impact. Well, I don't know why, but during all these years where I've been conducting analysis, everything is a curve. So great, and then down, then troublesome. But this takes time. I mean, have you detected this in your contributions? Something that starts very well, in a very good way, but maybe there are too many people involved or whatever the reason. Maybe then it gets some flatness and then it goes down. That could be due to temporality, I don't know. But you are mentioning, you're referring to technology, okay? But in the case of technology, I think this is more independent. Technology is more autonomous. We use it in a good way. That's true. And then over time, there are other uses, alternative uses that are not so good, like for Facebook or social networks. But we do not develop a lot of technology normally, but we use it to understand cities, so that I cannot really answer to you, because what you say in general, this is like technology, cars, social networks, mobile phones, they start in a good way, and then after a certain period of time or lapse of time, you see that people are starting using those technologies in a more negative way, not in such a positive way. But we use that to read technology and to try to change it. So I cannot say that we've seen those curves that you mentioned in such a clear way. But there are other curves, like the exponential curves, for example, how things increase and grow. But from that reading, you infer that we are in a better situation now. So the space that we are inhabiting improves due to technology? Does it improve due to technology? Well, technology does not allow for understanding it in a better way. I mean, this is the Alfonso Cerdà's dream in the city of Barcelona when he built Barcelona. He was saying, I hope that urbanization will be like a science where data will enable us to understand cities better. Now we have this. We have data. We have this dimension. We can understand cities better. And if we want to design it in a better way, we could do that. But if we want to use technology to create digital ghettos, then we can do that as well. Ghettos are negative, and we can use technology for negative purposes as well. But we can understand cities better thanks to all that technology, much, much better than 50 years ago, for example. Now we can see cities in a way that many in the past dreamed of doing, but could never do. But I think there are these new trends in cities. We need to acknowledge that. These are slightly negative things, the ones that I mentioned in my presentation, and I think that this is going to be a challenge, because if you can finance more and more in a city, this can lead to problems, because this is a financial system that wants to have a profit, that wants to have some advantages. So it's not based on generosity, helping people just by the pleasure of helping people. No, these companies or this high financial is extractive. So it uses extractive logics in our cities. And this is something that we should study more in depth. It is very interesting to see how cities become spaces with a lot of values that you can extract. But this is very different from what you show, which is very positive. I think that what Saskia is saying is something bigger, because Romans, for example, ancient Romans, used to say that there were two words for cities. Urbe, which means big city, the physical city, the built city. And then there is the civitas, which is the community of people there. The civitas, that is Latin. And then the risk that you mentioned is when the civitas does not have the control of those. And for Romans, ancient Romans, well, it was like both things were together, but now the high financial sector can make a kind of rupture between these two concepts. Now, for example, tourism creates a fracture, a crack between the civitas and the urbanitas, so the physical city. But this is something that we need to solve. We need to avoid to avoid this crack. Tourism, for example, years ago there were like 10 million tourists, but then now there are thousands of millions, and things that happen in cities such as Venice. This is a very clear example, because you have too many tourists in such a small city, but it happens also in Barcelona or in Amsterdam and in other places. And there is a crack, there is a gap, I would say, between the civitas and the urbanitas. And there is also another big gap that we see in New York or in London or in other cities, where you see rich people, wealthy Russians, for example, that buy apartments that are always empty, that are making a gentrification of the whole district, and they're always empty, and they are never inhabiting those flats or those apartments, and that is a crack, a gap between, or a fracture between the civitas and the urbanitas. So the citizens do not have the control of the city any longer. This is a very interesting thing, and we can help here, and we are teaching together with Richard Senes. That semester we were dealing with this on the MIT. Richard is the Saskia's husband, or, well, partner, let's say, not husband exactly. Anyway, and we are working on the notion of citizenship, and from there on we can solve those problems a little bit. Citizens have citizenship, which is something that starts with rights and duties, both rights and duties. And what we see here now is that there are people having the advantage of cities, but, like for example, tourists, but do not participate in the life of the civitas, in the life of the city. And the life of the city. I wanted to add something before he was saying all these nice words. In London, something that you mentioned that I wanted to correct or nuance a little bit. In London, Greater London, there are 65,000 buildings that are bought by foreign actors or agents that do not have a name, and most of them are empty. And my question would be, okay, they are empty, what a pity. But my question would be rather, they have been used in a way that they don't need to be occupied by people, because when you have people in those buildings you may have problems, complications, etc. So I'm tracking this down in different countries, and I think that this is a new modality or something new. you have several options. The simplest one, okay, is a way you can launder your money laundering. You can buy houses so that your illegal money or whatever it gets, laundered. But then the other thing is there is another phenomenon, and I mentioned that in my presentation very briefly, the fact that the building starts working as an asset. So it is empty, but it is an asset. So this is a new modality that is settling down in cities, and which is a very negative thing for cities. There are so many empty buildings in London, in Greater London. Nobody knows who is the owner. The owners are all out of the country, out of England, and those buildings are working in a passive way, but they are working, and this is a new morality, and we, the citizenship, let's say, are not ready to accept this concept or this notion. Okay, let's give the floor to the audience, but just before, I wanted to delve a little bit on whether there is a risk that these bad practices in global cities will be transferred to other cities, particularly in Europe or in Spain, the empty Spain or the empty Europe. What are the risks derived from this phenomenon, the gentrification, etc.? So there are two modalities. One is connected to cities, but I don't know if you know the Qatari royals and some other actors of that religion. They bought a large part of a poor European country, and the owners were small farmers. This is just an example, but there are many more that I'm tracking down. And they were saying, okay, we are going to pay you this money for your land. And so they were so poor, they accepted this. But of course, then they had to leave the country. So you're going to have a holiday for the rest of your life. And for many of these farmers in Eastern Europe countries, that was like a kind of a gift of the gods. And then they left those lands with just wheat cultivated there. And this is a modality that the Saudi Arabian people and the Qatari people are now doing, and this is a kind of mixture of utility functions that are transforming everything, not only the cities but different sectors. This is just a few. Such projects are only a few, but they are remarkable, and we need to survey those and monitor those.
Una manera un poco de
I think there would be a way of solving many of these problems that comes from this fracture, from this gap between Civitas community and the ones that have the control of the physical part. If we have a look at, for example, the empty apartments in London and other cities, we see that there's people that do not contribute to Civitas, to the collectivity in any way. But they have a deadline for that. We can solve this out. And what they do, for example, is, they buy the apartments at a very expensive price. They do gentrification, so that people that are there not only do not contribute there, but also they even contribute negatively. Because they can't be there because the prices will be more expensive. For example, a very simple way would be to say, in big cities, that people who don't live in the city, or if you don't live very much, you would have to pay more. For example, there's hotel in an island in Sweden that is called Gotland. In that hotel, if you spend one night, you pay $500. If you spend 1 month, you pay $5 per night. I don't remember the exact figures, but who doesn't want to participate in life has to pay a lot. So do you want an empty apartment in New York? Okay, that's fine, but you will pay $1 million every year. And this $1 million will be used because we, artists or whoever, can live at the same community. I think that we need to think it differently and say that if you want to have a place in the city, you have to contribute. First of all, with your presence, of course, because you're contributing to the community. And if you don't want to do that, if you you want to have the privilege of being a tourist in the city or having your apartment and just spend 1 week every year, you have to pay much more than others so that you can support, not with your presence, but with your money, you can support the community. So there would be many simple things that we can do in order to solve this fracture between civitas and urbis. The other actors that use it in a very different way. I totally agree on what you've just said. The point is that there are other ways that won't be easily removed. Yeah, but if you do not contribute, it is a contribution that doesn't only have to be financial, but also a live contribution. We also, for example, there are places in the US where there's a community, there are communities, and if you're an artist, you have to pay less. I mean, they contribute differently. And now I have the possibility with data of measuring this contribution of people that do not contribute and want to be part of that. It won't be easy, but it can be done. But we are in Telos, and we are very optimistic. So, and Carlos is a flagship of this position. So, it's great to listen to this type of proposal. So let's open the Q&A session. Rafa Martinez Cortiña belongs to the scientific committee of Telos magazine, is the promoter of the digital nation with initiatives with some city councils and regions here in Spain. Hello, good evening. I have a question. So for the 2030 agenda, it's only 10 years left. What's the role of inclusive cities and sustainable cities? Thank you. What was the first part, sorry? For the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. So that's the first part of the question. What's the role of the cities? Are SDGs as a goal, so to speak? Well, cities will always have the capability of destroying something in the environment because the factor of all stones, etc. will know that. There's no perfect city that can just simply contributes 100% positive things. The point is, how do we do that with big cities? How can we implement what we could implement? There will always be negative elements, I think, in the environmental, from the environmental point of view. But we could do it in a much better way. And a very simple part is, for example, instead of having big operators like, for example, the ones we have that sell absolutely everything, to have many partial circuits within a city, many small economies, as it used to be. The capability of growing vegetables, etc. We need to change some things that could have a very positive effect. But it won't be easy. And it's not only technology who can change it. It's a matter of how people understand their position, etc. I don't know if I've answered your question, but it's an important question, and the answer is not easy. But I think that we can do a lot of things. I'll try to integrate my answer. I think they need a central place. And the reason is 4 figures. 2, 50, 75, and 80. Because cities are just 2% of the earth, of the surface, 50% of population, 75% of energy consumption, and 80% of CO2 emissions. So, a solution for the environment would need cities. There's no solution without cities, but it will never be perfect. No, it will be tough, but it has to be in the middle of every solution.
Precisamente hablando de ciudades, y quiero felicitar a...
Well, you're speaking about cities, and I would like to congratulate both speakers, and you're even doing it in Spanish, so good for you. But as part of the humankind evolution, we've moved from farmers and nomads in Africa to create cities that are the main area of knowledge of the humankind. This is why with progress there are more cities, there's more people, etc. But from a point of view, the countryside and ruralism is the past. I mean, it's like if we went back to Africa to live in the savannah, we need to live in smarter cities and connecting human beings to cities. So my question is, well, there's a part of the environmental movement that says, no, let's move to the countryside, let's move to the rural environment, and this reminds me to Pol Pot and Khmer Rouge. I mean, it's an evolution. It's a caveman system. We need to move to smarter cities, and well, this is my question. Yeah, but what we need are smaller societies. This what we have in the South South America. Endless cities are sacrificing their health to come to the job. That's a problem. London's too big, New York is too big. Well, I lived in Tokyo for 3 years. Tokyo is a heaven for me, and there are 37 million inhabitants, and almost the population in Spain. And it's marvelous. Everything works. Tokyo is clean. That you can lick the ground and you will clean your tongue. So yeah, I spent a lot of time in Tokyo. I spent a lot of time in Tokyo, but cities are destroying the environment because stones, things that we used to build, etc., are being destroyed. But Tokyo, I'll totally agree on that. Tokyo is great. New York is very different. So you defend the new social contract that you need for this new world. Well, as I still have the mic, please take the mic. Well, if the world had the demographic density of Tokyo, every single human being would fit in Japan. Because Tokyo has 37 million inhabitants, so the rest of the planet would be empty. So I think that's amazing. It's an interesting question. Well, I have many people in the countryside that are not cavemen, as he was saying, but with the internet we can live in the countryside in a very good way. We can stay connected, etc. There was a theory 20 years ago that said that with the internet the cities will be dead. This was one of the theories that, well, for example, Kevin Cross in England wrote a book that was called The Death of Distance. And it's like, you don't need cities anymore. We know that this is not true. We know that we want to be at a physical space, and there's something very interesting. The size of the cities is very important, but there's a guy that is called Zip. Zip was a professor in Harvard last year, half of the last century. Zip made a law that is called the Zip law. It's very simple. It says that this law has been verified in the US, all over the place, and 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. And it says that in every single country, the distribution of cities, the size of the population follows this law. It's very simple. It takes the first one, second one, third one, and they follow a power law with an -1 exponent. So, if you have Madrid, for example, you have Albacete and 4 Saragossas, and I mean, this law is quite different, and it has worked for many years, thousands of years. We don't know the reason. If there are mathematicians here, there's an important document by Krugman, who took the Nobel Award in economy like 15 years ago, about the Zip law. And this paper starts in a very simple way. It says, we economists are told that sometimes we develop very simple models of a very complex reality, but in the case of zip law, there's a very simple reality that we can't explain. And the most accepted explanation is that this is connected to the fractal nature of cities. The fractal nature is that when cities started 10,000 years ago, and the Neolithical era, they started in some way that people could live together with some friends, and in 6 kilometers away we can work at the countryside. And every 6 villages, for example, you have another one that is a little bit bigger, a central village where you have the market, and every 6 villages there's one in the middle of all of them that is a small city, etc. This fractal structure can be seen in the zip law. Both things say more or less the same, but now there's a big question, and the big question is, today some of these forces that were anchoring us to the countryside, we were stuck there to eat, to grow our crops, etc., are breaking. There were problems to be out of the cities in the past. When, for example, there were wars, people left the cities because the cities can be bombed in a much easier way. And people, 70 years ago, people in Europe left cities. Pandemias are dangerous too. It's much more dangerous to be in a city. Now we don't have global pandemias, but we always know that there's a warning of the WHO. For example, if we move to Manhattan, every person that lives in Manhattan could live in Cuba. So the rest of the world would be like a great central park to play and to do whatever it takes. But if there's a pandemia, we will all die. So, this is the repulsion and the agglomeration or conurbation force. And some of these repulsion forces, are much lighter. For example, we know that there won't be wars in Europe. I think that in the years to come we won't have wars, but and we haven't gone through important pandemias during these last years. So, we don't need to be the countryside to eat. So this is for the first time in the history of humankind that you can go to the supermarket and to take the apples that come from New Zealand. With these things, the big question is, will the zip law be valid, or for the first time in history, will it change? Will it change for this first time in history? We don't know. It's a very important question. If it's going to change, I think that we will not live in Japan or in Cuba, all the billions of people in the world, but we'll see a world where Madrid, Barcelona, New York, London in the world will do good, and smaller cities will suffer a lot as they are suffering in the US. So we'll stop here because we need to make Telos cycle sustainable too. We could spend the whole week talking to you, but we need to be out of the building at 9 o'clock. So this is the time that we would need to go out. So Carlo, Saskia, has been a great pleasure. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming along. The online course in Spanish has been amazing.